Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session today on the dating game. Joining us today is Marguerite Manelski from Inovia Consulting, and we're excited to have such a fantastic turnout today. Before I pass it over to Marguerite to cover on this topic, I would like to remind you that this session is being recorded and it will be posted to our on-demand webinar library for you to review and share with anyone. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to type those into the questions box. We will get them answered during our Q&A time at the end of our session. So now I'm going to pass it on to Marguerite to kick off our presentation.
Thanks, Angie. So we are going to discuss the dating game today. Before we get started, just to give you a little background on myself, my name is Marguerite Manelski. I am an application consultant with Inovia Consulting. I have been with Inovia for approximately about 9 months now. I came from the user side with 12 and a half years of experience, running from 3.6 all the way up to 2015 with focuses on the warehouse and purchasing, specifically demand planning. So kind of have a little bit of knowledge in all directions, but definitely warehouse related and purchasing related, which brings us to how we came to the purchasing dating game. So today we want to address the purchase order header dates, the line dates, also the header and line dates on sales date, on the sales orders, and location date setup. You may ask, all these are running together, what's the big deal? Well, you don't think of it as a big deal as an order entry person, but the people on the other side that maybe are taking the phone calls and ordering your product tend to see things a little bit different. So it's always important when you're entering things to take a time, question, are you doing things not only the best for you, but for the best of those that are also going to be associated with this process? So we're going to run through this. This is a pretty quick process, quick webinar. Just let's address some basic stuff. So on our purchase orders, we have a couple very important dates. We have in our general tab, our order date, our posting date, and our document date. Now, most customers, when they enter these, and especially your CSRs, they are just entering. They're not thinking of the repercussions and why things should be different. They're just entering. And there's a lot of businesses that's okay, but there's always those exceptions. So let's look at why those would be different. Our order date. This is the date that our order is submitted and created. Now, a lot of times people say, oh, that's just a pretty standard date. Well, it is in the fact that it's a date that you enter. But coming from the user side, the date we enter an order is not always the same date that we receive the order. And this was a big conversation within our organization internally. Do we always leave the order date and our document date the same, or do we change them? We opted to change them. And the reason being, we wanted our order date to represent the date that the order was submitted to us. So if we are telling our customers, hey, you're going to submit an order to us and we are going to have a confirmation to you within 24 to 48 hours. Well, that's great. But guess what? The customer submits an order on Friday afternoon at, say, 2 o'clock. So they're expecting you to provide them some kind of order confirmation Monday, Tuesday at the latest. But you don't enter the order for whatever reason. It gets missed. It is just something, maybe your business was shut down for the day. So you don't enter it until Monday. So you're saying, well, I have 24 to 48 hours to get the confirmation to my customer. So I enter it and I date it for today. Well, I'm not living up to the expectations that I have now given my customer. So what I should be doing is I want to enter my order date of the date that I actually received and they submitted this order. The document date is going to be the date in which I am putting the order in. Now, a lot of times people are saying, oh my goodness, what do I do? Because now I also have this crazy posting date. And as you see, a posting date is the date that will record on the ledger entries when an order is shipped. Now, here's where we run into the little question that everybody has. I have terms. How do terms come into play with these dates? Well, your document date is going to be your biggest factor in calculating your terms. So your document date is actually the date that NAV uses to calculate a payment due date. So if you know that you are not going to be putting this, or you're going to put this order in on Monday, but you know that you may not actually be posting this date and shipping this order for 2 weeks, your document date really needs to be 2 weeks out. And the reason being is if you have a term of 30 days and you have a document date of today, but you're not going to ship it for 2 weeks, guess what? When your customer gets that invoice, they're going to have 2 weeks to pay their invoice. Now, most customers, it's not a big deal because they know when they get it, and most people are just okay with this. The problem arises when you are trying to use discounts. If you pay your entire invoice within 10 days, you get a 5% discount. Pretty standard, but guess what? If you don't ship your order for 14 days, the system doesn't recognize that they are entitled to a discount because their 10-day window has already expired. So these are things that you have to look at your business and determine what is the best way. Again, order date is the date it's entered, but it could also be the date that your order was submitted. Posting date. This is the date that goes into your item ledgers. Document date is going to be your date that is used to calculate your due dates. Very important to look at each one of them, understand that they each function differently. As we continue on to our purchase orders, where a purchaser lives. And as a purchaser, I cannot express enough the importance of making sure these dates are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Horror stories from user side is always that people change dates or people don't use them. Well, for a salesperson, that may not be a bad thing. For a purchaser, it can absolutely ruin their day and ruin their other processes, such as purchasing your product on time. And any of us know the last thing we want is a customer on the phone who is upset because we have promised one thing and we have not delivered it. So this is the importance of using our dates correctly. On the purchase line, we are going to see our requested date. This is the date that we are requesting that our product be delivered to us. It is important that when you are submitting an order to a vendor, you are giving them a requested date. The requested date may represent today, it may represent the lead time. The difference being is in most times with most vendors, you have communicated that if I submit a purchase order and I have a requested date of today, and I know my lead time is 2 weeks, what I'm doing is I'm telling you that I need you to do everything you can to get me those parts as soon as possible. Some vendors are acceptable of this, others are not. It's a conversation that's very important to have with your vendors. Promised receipt date. This one is huge to a purchaser. Once you have this information, a purchaser or an expediter is able to give your sales department accurate information. This is the date that your vendor has promised that they will give you the parts. Now, as any one of us who has worked in a warehouse knows, that is not always what happens. Oftentimes, we are promised one thing, and the reality is something different. That is perfectly okay. We just need to make sure that we address it and enter it correctly. Planned receipt date. This is the date that we often expect the product to arrive. This is going to be the date that if your vendor promises and then has to change, this is what you will change. Oftentimes people say, oh, my plan date, my receipt date, and promise dates. They get a little goofed up. Plan date is going to be that date that you are expecting it to be in your warehouse. You will also notice that we have also put in here that you inspect the inbound purchase orders. So a planned receipt date is going to also be if you need to have something in your warehouse happen to this before it becomes available. So you may have an opportunity or to say to your warehouse, hey, if an item comes in, how long does it take you to ultimately get it on the shelf? As a user, our warehouse had 24 hours from the moment it hit the dock to ultimately get on the shelf and be put away. That was their time frame. We were accepting of that. We only had one problem, is what happens if it hits late in the afternoon and I have a promise or a planned receipt date of today. Well, we know as a purchaser that that's going to take them some time. As a warehouse employee, I know that it's hit the dock at 3 o'clock. My warehouse is not going to get it out. But guess what? Oftentimes your sales department does not know these things. So if you know that it's going to take you 2, 3, could be a week for your warehouse to put them away, we want to represent that. So we're going to look a little deeper a little bit later, and we're going to see how that actually plays into effect. The expected date. This is the date we truly expect it to be available in our storage facility. So as you see, this is calculated using a planned receipt date. And we will look a little harder at this, and as you look at the sample that I have on my screen, or on the slide, you will see I have the item in here twice, and I have two different things going on. My first one is going into my blue location, and I've requested my product to be delivered on the 28th. My vendor has promised it on the 1st. I've planned for it on the 1st, and I expect it on the 1st. But now I go to my red location. Maybe my red location isn't as efficient. Maybe there's some other processes that need to happen. So you see I've requested it for the 28th, but my red location is going to take a little bit more time to deliver. So instead of being delivered on the 1st, I'm expecting it on the 4th. My vendor has not changed what they have agreed to, so I still expect it on the 4th, but I don't actually have it available to me until the 6th. And that has got to do with a calculation that we will look at that shows us that we do have a handling time that needs to take place. Sales orders. Or we are going to look at them very much like we do on a purchase order. Order date. Pretty standard, the date the order was created. The posting date. Same type of thing. This is going to be the date that hits the item ledger, and it's going to be the date the order is shipped, and ideally invoiced. We always have those cases where your ship date and your invoice don't match because maybe you have an overnight process that runs. That is okay. Don't say, oh my goodness, I can't make these things match. It's never going to work for me. It's okay. Due date. This is ultimately the date that your invoice is due. The balance of your invoice will be due on this date. And as we talked about earlier, a payment discount date. This is in with your terms. You may have, again, terms that say if I pay with, vendors or customers pay within this time frame, they get this discount. You would want to indicate in your payment terms what that code is. It could be 10 days, it could be 5 days, it could be whatever you like. But you notice your payment discount date. This is the date that that invoice needs to be paid before it expires. So if they get a 5% discount if they pay within 10 days, on the 11th day, they no longer get that discount. The system is able to recognize this. So when the payments come through upon the posting date, they can say, well, I'm sorry, but you paid it on the 6th and your payment was due by the 3rd. Unfortunately, we do not honor that. Or maybe you had a mail delivery problem or you're more flexible with a specific customer and you're willing to honor that. But if they called you in April and said, hey, I forgot to make this payment that was due in February, but I still want my discount, more than likely you're going to say, sorry, you're 2 months too late. If you were 2 days, I would be willing to work with you. And that is okay. Again, you have to know what works for your business. Our next slide is a continuation on sales orders. This time I'm going to address the line. Just as a purchase order has lines and dates, sales orders have lines and dates. So our shipment date. This is the date that we are expecting the shipment to be shipped or it has already shipped. And as you see, I've notated that this is calculated based off of a requested delivery date and a lead time. So if a customer requests that I deliver this on a specific date of Friday, but I know that I have a lead time of 5 days, a transit time of 5 days, I may have to ship it on Monday. I may need to even ship it the Friday before. Very dependent on the service and where it's going. Planned shipment date. This is the date that the order should be shipping. So this is the date that you would want it shipped. Oftentimes your planned shipment date and your shipment date are going to be the same, but there always are those cases where things don't play out the way we want them to. And as we see, we have 3 types of delivery date. We have a planned delivery, a requested, and a promised. Just as we have with purchase orders, they're doing the exact same thing. We are promising that we're going to deliver it, or the customer is requesting, or we are planning. Now, here's where we run into a little bit of a snag. We say, but I have no control over UPS. UPS is busy. It's the holiday season. What do I do? The best thing we can do is we can plan for the order to be shipped on or delivered on a specific day. We can promise it, but we also need to make sure that our customer understands that we are promising that this will be delivered based off of our ability to ship it. If we ship it with enough time for it to get delivered and it does not get delivered, unfortunately, that is not something we are responsible for. And this is something you need to tread a little carefully with your customers, especially around holidays. Explain that you will do everything in your power to promise that it will be there, but understand that once it leaves our facility, it is in the hands of the carrier. So the other thing that we look at is we look back to our earlier conversation about inbound and outbound transit times. How do these play in and where do I handle them? As a user, this I never knew about. When I came over to the partner side and I learned about this amazing thing, I almost cried. I could not believe we didn't know about it. I could not believe that we never used it. It was just a game changer. So as you see, I have defined on this particular case, outbound warehouse time. This is the time that will be used to determine a shipment date. So if I know that it takes my warehouse 1 week to ship something, I need to make sure that they have the paperwork in their hand 1 week prior to when it needs to leave the building. I don't want to do the math. I know my salespeople don't want to do the math. So guess what? I can put it in here and I can make sure that this is filled in. This way, when all the dates are calculated and ticks are printed, these are printing 1 week ahead. It allows you to also build ahead. Oftentimes, you may be a business that wants to plan and always be a day ahead. You can put in here 1 day. It will allow you to continue to work ahead without having to constantly do the math and do these filters and do this. Your dates are going to automatically change. Inbound. This is the one that I absolutely fell in love with. Inbound. This is ultimately the date that when an item hits the dock, you have 2 days before it becomes available to your sales department. This was huge for our sales department. Like I said, we function under the philosophy as a sales department that as soon as it hit the dock, it was available. Clearly, my salespeople never worked within our warehouse. That is often the case with most salespeople, so they don't think about the labor that goes into it. They don't think about the fact that you have 27 skids sitting on your floor, and each skid could potentially have 200 items in it, and they want the one item that's less than an inch big. Not going to be easy to find when it's 3:30 and UPS is arriving at 4. So what we were able to do is we could indicate in here that it would take our warehouse 2 days to handle it. So I expect my inventory to be arriving in my facility. So it's the date that I'm planning on it, but it's not actually expected to be available until 2 days after its arrival. With that being said, again, this is very important to address. Base calendars is also a huge, huge thing, especially for purchasing. Oftentimes people they don't run base calendars and they don't have understanding of why. Why do I need a base calendar? Nothing crazy happens. We're closed on Christmas. We're closed on 4th of July. Who cares? NAV cares. Without a base calendar, NAV looks at your system as a 24/7 operation. If you do not define that you are closed on weekends, if you do not define that you are closed for holidays, it is going to allow you to create orders, both purchase and sales orders. It's going to make recommendations for days that you may not even be in the building. That is something that none of us want to deal with. You want to know that you're closed on Christmas. You want the system to say, hey, I can't take product in on Christmas because nobody's going to be here to receive it. That may affect when your vendor ships your product. Maybe they need, because you're closed on Christmas, they need to ship on Wednesday versus shipping on Friday. This allows you to also keep from having to constantly manually update these. As a purchaser, I lived on requisition worksheets. Without a base calendar, my life would have been all over the place. I would have been like, why is my system ordering for Saturday? I don't work on Saturday. Nobody's going to be here to unload a truck. Here I was able to define and say, we're closed on Saturdays, we're closed on Sundays, here are my holidays. Please don't do anything for those dates. With that being said, I do see that there are a couple questions, and I see that there is the location setup available. So I will go and let's see if I can get my samples to come over here. I have been struggling a little bit with my test database, so we'll see. Hopefully it does work with me. So locations. If you're running multiple locations, it's important to make sure that you have each location in here clearly defined. And even if you're running one location, I still suggest having a location set up so that you can define these things. Even if you are not using bins, that is okay. Your most important thing that you want to have is your address, your basic information, and whether or not you're using picks and putaways, that's okay. But here is where you ultimately want to have those defined characteristics of your inbound and outbound transfers. I also see that we had a question in reference to the document date on the sales order determines the invoice. It does. That document date is what is going to be your driving factor. So if we look back at our sales orders, and actually we'll go to our purchase orders, document date, same thing. This is the one that drives your invoice. So if you know that you're not going to be posting for 2 weeks, schedule it out for 2 weeks. That way your terms are caught and there are no questions, no confusion about when is my payment due, when is it not. It's one of those best practices because you may say, oh, you know what, we've been dealing with Sally for 15 years. She understands completely. It's from whatever date she gets the invoice. Well, guess what? Sally wins the lottery and she moves away. So now Sarah starts. Sarah doesn't know this stuff. Maybe Sarah doesn't care. Maybe Sarah's on the phone calling you every day and saying, my payment says my document is saying that I need to have a payment to you in 5 days, but I have a net 30 process. You need to update your stuff. That's very possible. I worked for a controller who she liked her stuff very neat, very organized. And that's where this got drilled into our head. Update your dates, make sure that they're correct, because you never know who else is ultimately affected by that date, by that field, or anything else. So don't just say, I'm just going to go with it because it's easy, it's what populated, I don't care. Well, you know what? When it comes back and something does that and it happens to you, you care. And the best thing to do is just handle your dates accordingly. The other question that we did have was in reference to drop ships. Drop ships is one of those ones that I don't care what people do, there's always going to be something that somebody's like, I need it better. And I completely understand. Again, sales would be in my face. And this would be the exact screen they would come, and I'd have a sales manager standing next to me and say, I need to know when this order is going. I need to know when this is going to be here. How do I do that? Unfortunately, there is not the easy, simple way we would like to see of my purchase order says that my parts will be here. Unfortunately, that's not just a standard fact box. I wish it was a field on there. It unfortunately is not. The best way to handle this is if you have a sales order that is set up as a drop ship and you want to see when is it going to be here. Unfortunately, we got to go to our order and purchase order. This is the easiest way to get there without having to go and find and dig through a bunch of screens and find where it's at. And now it brings me straight to my purchase order, at which point I can get my dates. Again, unfortunately, there's not the simple way of it to just say parts expected on this date. And with that being said, Angie, I turn it back over to you if we have no other questions.
All right, thank you, Marguerite. I see that you have covered the majority of the questions. One other question that we had is there a field on the sales order screen to access expected receipt dating from a drop ship purchase order that is connected?
Yeah, so that goes back to exactly what we were just discussing is, unfortunately, that field doesn't exist as standard. So we would have to look at a modification. I don't recommend that particular modification because you are looking at having to make so many links item by item. Unfortunately, it is a little bit of a cumbersome process. That's unfortunately the way it is. Again, making the link directly from the sales order to the purchase order versus ultimately what we used to do is we would go to item card and then we'd go to our purchase orders and then we'd click around that. Finally, we're like, why do we do this? We just click 2 clicks and we're there. So instead of a fact box, unfortunately, it's just that standard function. Were there any other questions?
Thank you. No, there are no new questions that have come through. If anybody does have any questions, please go ahead and type those into the questions box and we'll get those answered for you. And as always, if you have additional questions that you come up with later, you can contact us or your account manager here at Inovia Consulting, and we would be happy to discuss those with you.
Okay, I do see one other question, Angie, and I see what reports do you use to manage your PO and sales order dates? That's kind of a loaded question. As a purchaser, we ran multiple jet reports. There was no standard reporting that we found that worked for our exact needs. One of the reports that we ran was an expected report. This was run by our expediter, and every morning he would run this report and he would look at everything that now had a past due date. This report allowed him to then reach out to the vendor, whether email or phone call, and get those updated dates. He never tried to do it early because, every time he tried, they would say, well, it's on UPS. It's not scheduled to be in your building until today, so call me tomorrow. Other vendors were a lot more understanding. We also ran a back order report, and that back order report for sales was something that one of my best friends still runs to this day. And they've tweaked it, and what they do is they go through, and there are going to be times that you clearly want it to be a true back order, and other times you don't. We used it as a way to monitor if it was we lost, or if the order was late because of something we failed on within our warehouse, or if it was something the vendor failed on. They had different parameters that they would define and use this report for, but neither report was run using standard nav. Both were built using jet reports. That also will link over to a future webinar that I will be having in reference to building vendor ratings outside of nav using jet reports. I believe that is scheduled for June. But if anyone has questions in reference to that or how we use these reports, please feel free to contact me. I will gladly walk you through and explain how we use them and where the advantage came from them.
All right, thank you, Marguerite. I think those are all the questions that we have. Like I said, if anybody does have any further questions or if you want us to elaborate more on your questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Marguerite does have her information up on the screen. And I'd just like to thank everyone for joining today. Thank you, Marguerite, for the presentation, and to let you know that we do have some more webinars coming soon. Tomorrow, the 18th, we have Remy from Generics Group, and he's going to be presenting on, are you having trouble managing your warehouse projects? And then on Thursday, December 19th, we have Jenny Hollingsworth from Inovia Consulting, and she's going to be presenting on sales order promising, an underutilized feature in Business Central. So if you're interested in any of those webinars coming up or any of our future webinars, please visit our website, and that's inovia.com/events. And have you heard of our podcast that we have going on? It's called the Inovia Conversation. You can find out about all the different podcast platforms to listen to on our podcast page, and that's inovia.com/podcast. So check out the podcast selection and subscribe so you'll be notified when those new episodes air. All right. We thank you again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on another Inovia webinar, and I hope everyone has a very happy holiday.
Thank you, everyone.